Okay, good evening, everybody. Tonight's Wednesday night. It's Halacha and Tanya. Last Wednesday night, we started learning the dinim of what's called pas akum, pas palter, bread that was baked by an individual non-Jew. The Jew is not allowed to eat because they might cause assimilation between them. If it's pas palter, meaning the bakery baked it, so then there's our leniencies, even though in the Hasidic world they're very strict about it. In halacha, the leniency is that if there's no bread as good as that, or you can't get any pas Yisroel, then you can use pas palter. And we mentioned, very important to note, all the hechsherim, OK, are not pas Yisroel unless if they write clearly on it is pas Yisroel. They go with the leniency of pas palter of the bakery, and that's what it is. It's a company. They're not making it for anybody in mind. Okay, then we started talking about the concept of bishul akum. Bishul akum means that a non-Jew cooks. A non-Jew cooks the food. Now, the criteria of bishul akum is, number one, it has to be something that you cannot eat raw. Okay? Something that you can eat raw, there's no bishul akum on. In other words, you can eat a raw apple, therefore if a non-Jew makes a baked apple, there's no problem with it. I mean, obviously if it's kosher, everything, because an apple is something which is eaten raw. So anything which is eaten raw is not called bishul akum. Another thing, the criteria is it has to be elal shulchan malachim. It has to literally means fit for a table of a king, i.e., it means that you serve it at a banquet. Things that are not served at a banquet, there's no din of bishul akuman. We also discussed last week that there's a leniency concerning steamed. There's a lot of steamed vegetables, steamed, things like that. That according to Allah, that Tshuva writes, because when the Chachamim forbade cooking of a guy, they only said cooking and roasting and baking. But everything else, if it's steamed or pickled or processed like that, there is no din of bishul akum on it. So therefore, a lot of the canned goods today are steamed, as we mentioned, and therefore, as long as it has a good hechsher, there's really not an issue with bishul akum. But there's another issue with bishul. To give you a few examples of where the discussion is. Last week we spoke about potato chips. We said potatoes are served at a banquet. Potato chips are not served at a banquet because it's not a prominent food. It's a snack. It's not lalafis banasapas. It says it has to be a food that not only fits for the table of a king, it has to be a food that's made to accompany bread. Now, it's made to fill you up. So the question, do you look at potatoes, which are today, it is fit for a banquet, or do you look at the fact that it's potato chips? And we said, halachically, you can be lenient. There are some people that are machmir. But let's take, for instance, a very practical issue that comes up. You have all these breakfast cereals. Kellogg's, Post, General Mills. I'm not advertising any particular company. So let's say you have a cereal, okay? Is there a problem of bishul akum on those cereals? Are you allowed to eat those cereals? So again, to say that there's nobody that's machmir, I'm not going to say. There are opinions that are machmir. Majority of opinions, and that's the halacha really, that you could be lenient for two reasons. Number one, it's steamed. Most of the breakfast cereals are actually steamed rather than cooked or fried. And even if not, the fact is you don't serve Frosted Flakes or Corn Flakes or Cheerios at a banquet. It's not made to accompany bread. It's not a prominent food. Plus, there's an additional leniency that Pus can bring down. You don't eat it plain. You eat it with milk. Okay, basically cereal and milk. So cereal itself is not the food the way you eat it. You don't eat cereal just by itself. So therefore, bottom line is, halachically, all the cereals, the Post, Kellogg's, General Mills, as long as they have a hechsher on them, OK, or whatever it is fine. and there's no problem of bishul akum on those issues. The issue is you have, we mentioned this past week, but I need to emphasize it. If a non-Jew cooks an egg, let's say you have a housekeeper, and they want to fry an egg for your kids, and they fry an egg, that's problem of bishul akum. An egg is considered a prominent food eaten to accompany bread. The non-Jew is frying the egg or cooking the egg, whether boiled, hard-boiled eggs, or if they do everything from A to Z, then you're not allowed to eat that egg. Not only that, but the utensils need to be kosher according to many opinions. If a non-Jewish person cooks or fries or bakes fish, meat, any of those things, because they're not eaten raw, they're fit for a table of a king, and it's a prominent food, so then you're not allowed to eat the food. Plus, you need to kosher the utensils. We also mentioned last week, I'm emphasizing because it's a very, very practical dinner. A non-Jew is allowed to reheat food. You're allowed to reheat food that was already cooked by a Jew. Because we learned last time, as long as there's a Jew participating in the cooking process, even though a non-Jew is also doing part of it, it doesn't matter. As long as there's a Jew doing something, part of it. I'll give you a simple example. By mistake, the non-Jew turned on the fire of the oven and put in fish to bake. And let's say in order to eat the fish, for argument's sake, it takes a half an hour. And you realize after 15, 20 minutes that, oh my God, the non-Jew put on the fire and put it into the oven. So what you need to do is take it out of the oven and put it back in, because then you did part of the cooking process. Or immediately shut the fire and then turn the fire back on, because then again, you did something in the cooking process. But if the non-Jew, if it takes a half an hour to bake fish, and after half an hour you wake up, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? It's too late, because it's already edible as is, and therefore you not only you can't eat the fish or the meat or whatever it is. We learned, according to many, many opinions, you need to kosher the utensils because it became not kosher. So people have to be extremely careful. I just want to mention when they used to have the airline dinners. I don't think I mentioned this last week, but when they used to have the airline meals, now they only have it in international flights. The local flights, the domestic is all of a shalom. They don't have any more meals. So how did the stewardess heat up the meal for you? How are they allowed to heat up the meal for you? They would serve it to you hot, the main course. And the answer is because it was already cooked by the Jew. The Jewish company cooked it already. All they're doing is reheating it. So that's not an issue. But the problem is, from a practical perspective, non-Jews that don't learn halacha will not know the difference between reheating and cooking. And sometimes if you let them reheat, they'll say, oh, okay, I could turn on the fire and heat the food. So they'll think, okay, so I could turn on the fire and make the food. So unless if you make it very clear to them that they're not allowed to do that, you're going to have a problem. So again, you have to set up the kitchen in a way that you have this issue within the hotels. I mean, all these places where people go to take food. For instance, rice is considered elal shulchan malachim today. Rice is considered food which is served at a banquet. So therefore, you can't have a non-Jew cooking rice or baking rice for that matter. Rice is not eaten raw. It fits all the criteria of bishul akum, and the person would have to be, and you have to be strict, and you can't have it. Now, in fact, there's even an interesting question. And by the way, there are people that are strict on it, poskim, but nowadays everybody's lenient. If a guy makes you a cup of coffee, is that a problem of bishul akum? You go into a coffee shop, okay, all kosher, everything, okay? The non-Jew makes you a cup of coffee. Is it bishul akum on coffee? So there are opinions that were machmir, by the way, in earlier halacha. But today, most opinions are lenient when it comes to tea, coffee, because tea is again a prominent drink. Like coffee is a prominent drink. Nevertheless, people are makel and tea and coffee and all those types of things that there shouldn't even be an issue with it. I'll give you another example. What happens if a guy cooks milk? So over there, milk, they write that milk is eaten raw. You could drink milk raw. I mean, years ago before pasteurizer, what did people do? They milked the cow and they drank the milk. It was very fresh milk and they drank the milk. They didn't pasteurize it. And there wasn't an issue, by the way, health-wise, because unless the cow's sick, there's no issue with it. The milk is pure. So I'm just saying milk is not a problem. But the other things, eggs, you have to be very, very careful with bishul akum. Sfardim, by the way, are more strict than Ashkenazim. Ashkenazic opinions say that as long as the Jew turns on the fire, even if the non-Jew puts the food into the oven or puts the pot on top of the stove, Ashkenazic poskim hold it's not an issue. And the whole Ashkenazic world is lenient. The Sephardic world holds, the Sephardic poskim, I know maybe some are lenient today, but generally speaking, the Sephardic poskim are stricter, and they say it's not enough for a Jew to turn on the fire. The Jew also has to put the food into the oven. But I just want to mention, if you hold with that opinion, don't even think about eating in any restaurant. Don't even think about eating, if you're machmud, that bishul akum, that a Jew has to put it into the oven also. That doesn't exist, at least in LA. To my now, maybe we have Sephardic communities, maybe the mashgichim are much stricter there for the Sephardic community. But generally speaking, in most restaurants, unless again, if it's a Sephardic community with a Sephardic restaurant with a Sephardic hashgacha, the non-Jews put the stuff into the oven. And therefore, again, Ashkenazic Jews, we can be lenient. There's no problem with that. But again, Sephardic Jews have to be careful. Okay, if there's any question about bishul akum, if not, we're going to move on to Cholov akum, Cholov Yisroel. Okay, next. Next halacha in the same chapter is again things that the Chachamim forbade. There's a mission that says, Cholov shel cholbul akum, milk that was milked by a non-Jew. Ve'ein Yisroel re'ehu, and a Jew doesn't see the milking, you're not allowed to drink it. Rabbinically, it's not kosher. Milk that was milked by a non-Jew and a Jew didn't see the milking, you're not allowed to drink that milk. According to halacha, by the way, and therefore if you make cheese from it, it's called cholov akum. That's the expression of the Mishnah. Cholov akum, akum is, by the way, an acronym for Eidik Chovim Umazolis, the ones that worship stars and constellations. But akum became an expression in halacha for a non-Jew. So akum, milk that was milked by a non-Jew. So therefore, any milk that a Jew didn't supervise the milking, at the time of the Gemara, it was forbidden to drink it. Now, why? So later on, and I'll explain this whole thing the way the Rebbe explains it very interestingly in a Sikha, that we're afraid they might mix pig's milk into the cow's milk. And we know any derivative of a kosher animal is kosher. A derivative of a non-kosher animal is not kosher. A milk from a kosher animal, a goat, a cow is kosher. Milk from a pig or a camel is not kosher because they're not kosher animals. Eggs from a chicken or a duck, which is a kosher food, a kosher bird, the eggs are kosher. Eggs from ostrich eggs or other non-kosher birds are considered treif. Mamish treif, you can't eat it at all. Caviar, which the good caviar comes from the sturgeon fish, which is a non-kosher fish. So the roe of a fish, which is called caviar in fancy language, of a treifa animal, of a treifa fish like sturgeon, you're not allowed to eat it. Salmon caviar, you're allowed to eat. It's eggs of a salmon. So it's derivative of a kosher animal, it's kosher. Derivatives of a non-kosher animal are not kosher. And therefore you can't eat it. So now you have like this. So and according to Chassidus, by the way, according to Chassidus, it is mitame, it impurifies the mind. It impurifies the mind. Cholovakum. They tell a famous story with a Polish great tzaddik, Reb Naftali Rapshitzer, one of the disciples of a disciple of the Maggid. So Reb Naftali Rapshitzer was once in somebody's house, and they put milk on the table. And he didn't see the milk. So somebody said to him, "Don't you see the milk?" And then he found out it was milked by a non-Jew. So he says, now I understand the Mishnah. It says, Cholov shechol b'akum, milk that was milked by a non-Jew, the Jew doesn't see it. He was a tzaddik. It was non-kosher, non-Cholov Yisroel, so he didn't see it. There are opinions in Halacha today, and I'm going to explain it, that hold that today in the big American companies, and listen carefully to what they're saying, in big American companies where the government doesn't allow you to mix pig's milk into regular cow's milk, and if you do, you get a big government fine. So therefore, there are poskim today that want to say that nowadays you could be a little bit more lenient, because official reason why you can't eat cholovakum is because a non-Jew might put pig's milk or other milk into the cow's milk, and therefore you're eating treif. They say today that the government supervises you and you can't do it, and if you do it, you're going to get a fine. And therefore, in Halacha, there's a concept, if the businessman is afraid to do something wrong, they're not going to do it. So therefore, by the way, that heter of non-Cholov Yisrael milk exists, number one, only in America, where there's government regulations. Europe doesn't have government regulations like America. China, forget about. There's not what to talk about. And even those that are permitted, by the way, only right either if somebody's sick or you cannot get Cholov Yisrael. The Moshe Feinstein's heter is only if you cannot get Cholov Yisrael, or somebody is sick and you can't get milk, and then they can have Cholovakum. But he held clearly that he himself didn't drink Cholovakum. But he held that if you're in a place where there's no Cholovakum, no Cholov Yisrael, so you can rely on the leniency that today, because there's government regulations, they're not going to put any pig's milk in. All the Hasidic poskim are against it. In the Hasidic world, they're extremely careful. In Chabad, we are very careful about Cholov Yisrael, not to drink Cholovakum. In fact, I know of a Hasidic Yid, and he told me the story himself, in England. Once by mistake, one of his kids, or two of his kids, by mistake, drank non-Cholov Yisrael milk. And he wrote into the Rebbe, he told me the story himself, I don't want to say names. He wrote into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe gave a whole tikkun, a whole process what the children should do to rectify the fact that by accident they drank non-Cholov Yisrael milk. So in our circles, we're very strict. But the Rebbe explains it in a sikha as follows. The Rebbe says, L'cheira, the question is like this. If the reason is you might mix pig's milk into it, but in America you can't do it. What happens if there's no pigs anywhere nearby? So what are you afraid? They're going to fly in pigs to mix milk into the... Come on, it's not going to happen. So the Rebbe explains that there's a very fundamental aspect in the Rebbe's sikha about rabbinic decrees. And the Rebbe explains like this. There are certain rabbinic decrees that the Chachamim, at the time they made the decree, said the reason for the decree. Okay? There are certain decrees that Chachamim said that we assimilation, for instance. They said the reason l'chatchila because of assimilation. Then the halacha is that if the reason doesn't apply, the halacha might not apply either. But because they gave it out l'chatchila with the reason. There are certain gzeiros of the Chachamim, certain decrees that the rabbis made, that they made the decree without a reason. A year later, they gave out the reason for the decree. Then the Rebbe writes, the halacha is, even if the reason doesn't apply, the decree remains. And the Rebbe writes, it's in Tafshin Yud Beis, the Rebbe writes that Cholov Akum was one of the gzeiros decrees that Chachamim made originally without a reason. They said you can't drink milk that a non-Jew milk. Later on, the Chachamim gave, a year later, they gave out the reason. So then the halacha is, even if the reason doesn't apply, then the halacha doesn't, the halacha still applies. Okay? Now, therefore, in our circles, we're very strict with Cholov. So I just want to go back 1 minute before I forget to say it. And this happens a lot in homes of people that are more from than other people in their family. And it's very practical. Then I'm going to have to mention it, and I'll come back to Cholov Yisroel in a minute. We learned that if a guy turns on the fire and cooks from beginning to end, you're not allowed to eat the food. If it's, fit for the table of the king, you don't eat it raw and so on. What happens if it's a Jew that's not religious? They're not Shomer Shabbos. The Jew is not Shomer Shabbos. And they cook for you. Does it have a din like a guy cooks for you? And then you wouldn't be allowed to eat it either? Or do we say, no, they're Jewish? Why did the Chachamim say you can't have a non-Jew cooking for you? Because you shouldn't marry, assimilate and marry them. But a non-religious Jew, you're allowed to marry. You're allowed to marry their kids. You're allowed to marry them. Halachically, you can marry, as long as they're Jewish, you can marry them. So therefore, there's a machlekes in halacha about bishul akum, and the same thing with pas akum. What happened if it's not a goy, but it's a mechalo Shabbos Jew that many times has a din of a non-Jew? If he cooks for you, are you allowed to eat the food or not? Obviously, we're talking you trust their kashrus and so on and so forth. This is a very common situation because a lot of times people become religious. Or there know many bachrim, I get this calls a lot. Bachrim, in yeshiva, or girls that are in high school becoming frum, and their parents are not Shomer Shabbos yet, and they're visiting home or they live at home. What are you going to tell them not to eat? And the mother, they trust the mother in kashrus. The mother is not Shomer Shabbos, but she cooks for them. So then the halacha is, by the way, and this is the opinion of most opinions, that number one, the fact that they're Jewish doesn't matter. Even if they're not from, it's not Jew, it's not a guy, it doesn't matter because you're allowed to assimilate with them. In addition to that, we know that 95% of non-religious Jews yet in America are what's called Tinnik Shenishba. They're not open desecrators of Shabbos because they don't know what Shabbos is all about. Machalo Shabbos, we learned in the past, means somebody knows the severity of Shabbos, they know all the halachos, and they broke away from Yiddishkeit. They turned away from Yiddishkeit. That may be as a din of a Machalo Shabbos. Even then, there's a lot of loopholes. But somebody who was never brought up religious and they don't keep Shabbos, they're not called a Machalo Shabbos, halachically. You can count them for a minyan. You can give them aliyahs. Okay, if not, you can close down most of the shuls in the world today. Because the Chabad houses all over the place have people that are not from you. They're working on them, making them from. But they wouldn't have a minyan. And halacha says clearly that if it's a tinnik shenishba, then they don't have a din of a goy. So therefore, if somebody is in a house of a relative, and you trust their kashrus. I'm not saying that's your business already to know. Do you trust them? Do you not trust them? What they're using or not using? And they cook for you even though they're Mechal Shabbos. According to Halacha, if you need to be lenient, you're allowed to be lenient. You're allowed to eat the food. Okay, it's coming back to Cholov Akum. So I just want to mention like this. Not only do we hold that Cholov Akum is not kosher, the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch, and this is what it says in Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah holds that not only is Cholov Akum, there's goyish milk or cheese or cream or ice cream or whatever it may be, you're not allowed to eat. It even forbids the utensils. That means that Ramah in Shulchan Aruch writes, if somebody cooked non-Cholov Yisroel milk in a pot, the pot is treif and needs to be kashered. If somebody bakes cheese, non-Cholov Yisrael cheese, in an oven, the oven would need to be kashered. That's what it says in Shulchan Aruch. Some people today, I say today, where there's no pig's milk, it's only a chumrah, it's not halacha, and therefore you don't have to kasher the kelim. But we don't hold like that. In Shulchan Aruch it says that the Ramah writes clearly, the kelim are treif and they need to be kashered. So based on that, and again I want to say that all the OUDs, OKDs, ChavKDs, all the big companies, if it doesn't say Cholov Yisrael, it's not. They give a hechsher, a non-Cholov Yisrael, to the masses. In fact, it's known that the OK hechsher, which was started by Rabbi Beryl Levi Olav Shalom, a generation or two ago, he was a Chabadnik, full-fledged Chabad Chassidish Yid, and he started the OK, and OK became a very, very big company. And the way I heard the story, he asked the Rebbe if he should give a hechsher non-Cholov Yisrael. He's not doing it as a Chabadnik, he's doing it as an OK hechsher. And the Rebbe said, yes, you should, because otherwise people will eat real treif. If they don't have an OK cheese, let's say that's Cholov Akum, so then they'll go buy a tray for cheese. And there are leniencies at least about Cholov Yisrael. So the Rebbe told me you should give. But you should know, unless of the OK, OU, Chavk, all the other kashrus agencies, all the other 1,700 of whatever they are in the world, it doesn't say Cholov Yisrael, it's not. Not only that, and it's getting late, but a lot of, okay, I'm going to leave this detail of it for next time, that you have to be very careful when you buy Cholov Yisrael. We're going to learn it next week about the kashering of the machinery. Most Cholov Yisrael companies don't have their own farms. Most Cholov Yisrael, there are a few companies that do, J&J does. There's a very few companies that own their own farms, and therefore it's only Cholov Yisrael. But there are many Cholov Yisrael companies that don't have their own farms. They go to Goyish companies, and they take a day or two of milk, and they actually kosher the utensils. Which utensils you have to kosher? The pasteurizer, hot milk is going through. The vats, there's a lot of issues there. And we're going to leave it here because we'll discuss the various methods of koshering it and the ability, the physical ability to be able to kosher some of those machinery because it's very complicated. Okay, that's for now. We'll go to Tanya.